The scream tore through the north hall before Naomi even reached the door, and she knew, before she saw anything, that her life had just cracked down the middle. She had been carrying a stack of ceremony linens, her arms full, her mind on the mating ceremony that was only 3 weeks away. The Ashmore pack house was usually calm at this hour, lit by lanterns and filled with the low hum of evening chores. But the sound that came from behind the study door was not calm. It was Camille's laugh, low and familiar in a way that made Naomi's stomach drop before her mind caught up. She set the linens down slowly on a side table, her fingers trembling only a little. She told herself it was nothing. Roderick was Alpha King. He met with dozens of people every day, pack members, allies, traitors. There was no reason her chest should feel this tight. But her wolf disagreed. Her wolf had gone still and sharp, the way it did before danger, and Naomi had learned a long time ago not to ignore that stillness. She pushed the door open without knocking. Roderick stood near the window, his broad shoulders outlined by the last orange light of evening. Camille was close to him, closer than any pack business required, her hand resting on his forearm, her head tilted up with an ease that spoke of history neither of them had ever fully explained to Naomi. For one long second, nobody moved. Then Roderick straightened, and Camille's hand slid away too slowly to be casual. "Naomi," Roderick said, his voice even, almost bored. "You should have knocked." "I did not think I needed to knock in my own home," Naomi said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Camille smiled, the kind of smile that was built to look innocent and never quite managed it. "We were only talking about the border agreement, Naomi. No need to look so pale." Naomi did not answer her. She looked at Roderick instead, searching his face for something, anything, that would make this feel like the misunderstanding he wanted her to believe it was. She had known him for 6 years. She had learned every shift of his jaw, every flicker behind his eyes, and what she saw now was not innocence. It was irritation. The irritation of a man caught doing something he did not intend to stop doing. "The border agreement," Naomi repeated slowly. In the dark, with the door closed. "Do not start this," Roderick said, and something in his tone made the room feel colder. "You are imagining things that are not there." Naomi had spent years being told her instincts were wrong. She had learned to doubt the tightening in her chest, the small warnings her wolf gave her, when Roderick came home late, smelling of unfamiliar air, when meetings ran longer than they needed to, when Camille's name came up more often than any old acquaintances should. She had told herself that trust meant looking past small things. She had told herself a lot of things. She was done telling herself anything tonight. "I am not imagining the way she is standing," Naomi said quietly. "I am not imagining 6 years of small excuses." Camille's expression shifted, amusement flickering somewhere underneath her practiced concern. "You should be careful, Naomi. Jealousy does not suit a future Luna." "I am not jealous," Naomi said. "I am done." The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise Roderick. He crossed the room in 3 strides, his height suddenly a wall in front of her, his voice dropping low enough that only she could hear it. "You do not get to be done," he said. "You are 3 weeks from the ceremony. Every pack in this territory expects it. Do not embarrass me over nothing." "Nothing," Naomi echoed. She looked past him at Camille, who had settled herself into a chair as if she owned the room, as if this argument was simply entertainment for her. "Is that what she is to you? Nothing?" Roderick did not answer right away, and that silence told Naomi everything his words had refused to say. "Go to bed, Naomi," he said finally. "We will discuss this when you are calmer." She wanted to scream at him that she had never been calmer in her life, that this clarity was the calmest she had felt in months. Instead, she turned and walked out of the study, her spine straight, her hands steady even though her heart was breaking apart piece by piece behind her ribs. She did not go to bed. She went to find Grace. Grace had been her closest friend since childhood, one of the few people in Ashmore who had never treated Naomi differently because of her place beside the Alpha King. Grace's room was at the end of the east corridor, and Naomi knocked twice before letting herself in. Grace took one look at her face and set down the book she had been reading. "What happened?" "I found them together," Naomi said. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and she hated herself for it. "In his study, standing too close, talking about nothing that needed a closed door." Grace's expression darkened. "Camille, Camille, Naomi confirmed. He denied it, I assume. He told me I was imagining things. Naomi sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. He told me not to embarrass him. Grace was quiet for a moment, her jaw tight. Naomi, I have heard things. Small things. Whispers among the guards about how often he visits the southern border where her family has land. I did not want to say anything without proof. You do not need to apologize, Naomi said. I think some part of me already knew. They sat together in silence for a long while, the kind of silence that comes after a truth finally settles into place. Naomi stared at her hands, at the ring Roderick had given her when their bond was first announced, a simple silver band engraved with the Ashmore crest. It had once felt like the beginning of everything. Now it felt like a weight. What will you do? Grace asked eventually. I do not know, Naomi admitted. The ceremony is in 3 weeks. The whole pack is preparing. My mother has already sent word to every relative we have. None of that matters if he does not love you, Grace said gently. None of that matters if he never did. Naomi flinched at the honesty of it, but she did not argue. She had spent years building a life around Roderick's ambitions, his plans for the pack, his vision for uniting territories. She had told herself that love could grow from loyalty and shared purpose. She had told herself that the coldness she sometimes felt from him was simply the weight of his responsibilities. But tonight, standing in that study, she had seen the truth in Camille's easy confidence and Roderick's guilty irritation. This was not new. This had been happening for a long time, hidden behind meetings and border talks and excuses she had been too afraid to question. I need air, Naomi said, standing suddenly. Grace caught her wrist. Do not do anything reckless tonight. Sleep on it. Things will look different in the morning. Naomi managed a small, tired smile. I am not going to do anything reckless. I just need to think. She left Grace's room and walked out into the pack grounds, where the night air was sharp and clean against her skin. The training yard was empty at this hour, moonlight spilling across the packed earth where she had spent countless mornings sparring with the younger wolves, teaching them discipline and patience. She had built a life here. She had built relationships, responsibilities, a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with Roderick's throne. She thought of the years she had given to Ashmore. She thought of every ceremony she had helped plan, every dispute she had helped settle, every young wolf she had mentored. She had believed she was building something permanent. Now she wondered if she had only ever been a placeholder, a convenient match while Roderick waited for the right political moment to bring Camille back into his life properly. The thought settled into her chest like a stone. She walked for a long time, past the training yard, past the old oak tree where she and Grace used to sit as children, until she reached the low stone wall that marked the edge of the residential grounds. From here, she could see the lights of the main hall glowing warm and golden, could hear faint music drifting from the evening gathering that was still going on inside, unaware that anything had changed. Life inside those walls would continue as if nothing had happened. The pack would keep preparing for a ceremony that suddenly felt like a lie, and Naomi would be expected to smile through it, to play her part, to protect Roderick's reputation, even as he broke something inside her that she was not sure could be repaired. She did not know yet what she would do. She only knew, standing there in the cold night air, with her arms wrapped around herself, that something fundamental had shifted. The version of herself who had believed in patient loyalty, who had trusted that time would fix what felt broken, was gone. In her place stood someone harder, someone who was beginning, for the first time in years, to ask herself what she actually wanted. Behind her, footsteps approached, careful and deliberate. She turned, half expecting Grace, but it was one of the older pack elders instead, a woman named Hazel, who had known Naomi since she was a pup. You should not be out here alone this late, Hazel said, though her tone held no scolding, only quiet concern. I could not sleep, Naomi said. Hazel studied her for a long moment, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Word travels fast in this pack, child. Faster than anyone would like. Naomi's chest tightened. You heard. I heard enough. Hazel came to stand beside her at the wall, looking out over the same lights Naomi had been watching. I will tell you something I have learned in my many years leading beside alphas and their mates. A pack can survive many things, poor harvests, border disputes, even war, but it cannot survive a Luna who has stopped believing in her own worth. I do not know what my worth is anymore, Naomi admitted quietly. Then it is time you found out, Hazel said. Somewhere far from these walls, if that is what it takes. Naomi looked at her, startled by the suggestion, but Hazel only offered a small, knowing smile and turned to walk back toward the main hall, leaving Naomi alone with her thoughts and the cold, clear night sky above her. She stood there long after Hazel had gone, watching the stars, feeling the weight of a decision beginning to take shape somewhere deep inside her, a decision she was not ready to name yet, but one that felt, for the first time in a long while, entirely her own. The public humiliation came 3 days later, at the autumn gathering, in front of every family Ashmore called its own. Naomi had dressed carefully that morning, choosing a deep green dress that Roderick had once told her matched her eyes. She had told herself she would hold her head high, that she would give him no reason to say she had embarrassed him. She had spent 3 sleepless nights convincing herself that perhaps Hazel's words had been born of gossip, that perhaps there was still something worth saving. She stopped believing that the moment Roderick stood at the front of the gathering hall and called for silence. "Friends," he began, his voice carrying easily across the crowded room. "Ashmore has always grown strongest through wise alliances." Naomi felt Grace's hand find hers in the crowd, a silent warning she did not need. She already felt the shift in the air, the way the room seemed to lean forward in anticipation of something important. "For years, our closest allies have been the Voss family," Roderick continued, "and I am pleased to announce that this alliance will soon be strengthened even further." He turned then, and held out his hand, and Camille stepped forward from the side of the room, dressed in deep red, her chin lifted with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times. "Camille Voss will be joining Ashmore's leadership circle," Roderick said, "as my closest advisor on matters concerning our southern borders." The words themselves were carefully chosen, careful enough that no one outside the small circle who already knew the truth could call it anything improper. But Naomi saw the way Camille's eyes found hers across the room, saw the small, satisfied curve of her mouth, and understood exactly what message was being sent. This was not an advisory appointment. This was a declaration. A murmur moved through the crowd, some confused, some curious, a few already exchanging knowing glances. Naomi stood frozen at the edge of the room, aware suddenly that every eye that was not on Roderick and Camille was on her, waiting to see how she would react. She thought of everything Hazel had said. She thought of every year she had given to this pack, every ceremony she had planned, every dispute she had helped resolve quietly so that Roderick never had to. She thought of the ring on her finger, still there despite everything, still sitting like a promise neither of them had ever truly kept. She did not scream, she did not cry, she simply turned, walked calmly to the edge of the hall, and stepped outside into the cool evening air, leaving the murmurs and the whispers behind her. Grace found her minutes later, breathless from hurrying after her. "Naomi, wait." "I am fine," Naomi said, though her voice shook slightly. "You are not fine. No one would be fine after that." Grace's eyes were bright with anger on her friend's behalf. "He humiliated you in front of the entire pack." "He did not humiliate me," Naomi said quietly. "He revealed himself. There is a difference." They stood together in the darkness outside the hall, the sound of music and conversation drifting faintly from inside, as if nothing had happened, as if Naomi's entire world had not just quietly ended in front of a room full of witnesses. "What are you going to do?" Grace asked. Naomi thought of Hazel's words from 3 nights ago, about finding her worth somewhere far from these walls. She thought of the elders who would expect her to accept this arrangement gracefully, to smile through it for the sake of pack unity, the way Lunas before her had been expected to endure far worse, for the sake of political convenience. "I do not know yet," Naomi said, "but I know I cannot stay here and watch this happen." The following days blurred together in a haze of quiet, careful preparation. Naomi went through the motions of her duties, attending meetings, overseeing the ceremony preparations that no one had officially canceled, all while a plan began to take shape in the back of her mind, one she shared with no one but Grace. The pack elders, when they finally addressed the situation directly, offered little comfort. Naomi was called before the council 3 days after the gathering, summoned to a small meeting room where 5 elders sat waiting, their expressions carefully neutral. "We understand this situation is difficult," said an elder named Nathaniel, his tone measured and diplomatic in the way that always meant bad news was coming. But you must understand the importance of the Voss alliance to Ashmore's stability. Are you asking me to accept my mate publicly courting another woman? Naomi asked, keeping her voice level despite the anger building beneath her ribs. We are asking you to consider the greater good of the pack, Nathaniel said. Camille's family controls trade routes vital to our southern territories. Alpha Roderick believes this arrangement strengthens Ashmore's position significantly. And what does it do to my position? Naomi asked. The silence that followed answered her question more clearly than any words could have. You will remain Luna in title, another elder offered, as if this was meant to be reassuring. Your role in the pack's daily governance need not change. But my role in Roderick's life apparently already has, Naomi said quietly. No one argued with her. No one defended Roderick. They simply sat there, 5 people who had known her for years, who had watched her grow from a young pup into a capable leader, and none of them offered a single word of support for the humiliation she had just endured in front of the entire pack. She left the meeting with a clarity she had not expected. The elders would not help her, Roderick would not change, and staying in Ashmore meant accepting a slow, public erosion of everything she had built, watching Camille's influence grow while her own diminished, year after year, until there was nothing left of the woman she used to be. That night, she found Grace waiting in her room, a small bag already packed beside the door. I am not letting you do this alone, Grace said before Naomi could even ask. Grace, this is not your fight. You have been my family since we were children, Grace said firmly. I am not asking permission. Naomi felt tears threaten for the first time since the gathering, not from sadness, but from the sudden, overwhelming relief of not being entirely alone. I do not even know where I am going. Then we will figure it out together, Grace said. They spent that final night packing carefully, quietly, taking only what they truly needed. Naomi left behind the silver ring, placing it deliberately on the center of the bed she had shared with Roderick for 6 years, a final, silent message that required no explanation. She thought about writing him a letter, explaining everything she felt, every betrayal she had swallowed, every excuse she had accepted that she should never have accepted, but in the end, she decided he did not deserve her words. He had made his choice clearly enough in front of the entire pack. She would let her absence speak for itself. As dawn approached, Naomi and Grace slipped quietly through the eastern gate, away from the sleeping pack house, away from 6 years of a life that had promised so much and delivered so little in the end. Naomi did not look back at the walls she had called home. She kept her eyes fixed forward, on the dark tree line ahead, on the uncertain future waiting somewhere beyond it. She did not know yet how far they would need to travel, or what dangers waited in the unclaimed territories between packs. She only knew that whatever came next, it would be built on her own terms, not on the quiet endurance Roderick and the elders had expected of her. For the first time in years, walking away from everything familiar, Naomi felt something unfamiliar stir beneath her fear. It was small and fragile, but it was there. It felt like the beginning of freedom. By the 3rd day of travel, Naomi understood that leaving Ashmore had been the easy part. She and Grace had moved carefully through the unclaimed lands between territories, avoiding main roads, sleeping in short shifts among dense trees where their scent would be harder to trace. Neither of them carried much, a small amount of food, warm clothing, and the kind of determination that came from having nothing left to lose. We should have reached the Fenmore border by now, Grace said on the morning of the 3rd day, studying the tree line with a frown. The maps in the pack library made this route look shorter. Maps drawn by people who never had to walk it, Naomi said, trying to keep her voice light despite the exhaustion settling into her bones. Her feet ached. Her stomach had been empty since the previous evening, and the late autumn air had grown sharper with each passing mile. They pressed on through the morning, moving carefully through terrain that grew increasingly unfamiliar. By midday, the trees had thinned into rocky, uneven ground, and Naomi realized with a sinking feeling that they had drifted off any path either of them recognized. I think we are lost, Grace admitted quietly. Naomi did not argue. She had suspected as much for the last hour, though she had not wanted to say it aloud. They stopped near a small stream to rest and refill their water, and it was there, in that brief moment of stillness, that Naomi first caught the unfamiliar scent drifting on the wind. It was not Ashmore, It was not any pack she recognized. "Grace," she said quietly, "we are not alone out here." Grace went still immediately, her senses sharpening. How close? Close enough. They rose slowly, backs instinctively turning toward each other, eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The forest had gone quiet, in a way that felt deliberate, the birds silent, the usual rustle of small animals absent entirely. "We should move," Naomi said. They had barely taken 3 steps when the first stranger emerged from the trees ahead of them, a broad-shouldered man with sharp eyes and a guarded stance that immediately marked him as a trained warrior. 2 more followed close behind, positioning themselves in a way that made it clear retreat was no longer a simple option. "You are on Vaymont land," the lead warrior said, his voice low and even. "Unclaimed wolves do not usually wander this deep without a reason." Naomi felt her heart pounding, but she kept her chin lifted, refusing to let fear show on her face. "We did not mean to trespass. We are only passing through." "Passing through," the warrior repeated, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied them both. "From where?" Naomi hesitated. Speaking Ashmore's name here, in territory belonging to a pack she knew only by reputation as bitter rivals to her own former home, felt dangerous in ways she could not fully calculate. But lying to armed warriors on their own land felt equally unwise. "Ashmore," she said finally. The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. The warriors exchanged sharp glances, and the lead warrior's posture shifted from cautious to something closer to hostile. "Ashmore wolves, deep in Vaymont territory, with no escort and no explanation," he said slowly. "That is either remarkably foolish or remarkably interesting." "We are not here on Ashmore's behalf," Naomi said quickly. "We left. We are not welcome there anymore." She was not sure why she chose honesty in that moment, surrounded by strangers who could easily see them as threats or bargaining pieces. Perhaps it was exhaustion. Perhaps it was simply that she was tired of hiding things, tired of careful excuses and half-truths. Whatever the reason, something in her voice must have carried enough weight, because the lead warrior studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "The king will decide what to do with you," he said finally. "Come, do not resist, and no harm will come to you." Naomi and Grace exchanged a brief, uncertain look, but there was little choice in the matter. Surrounded, exhausted, and deep in unfamiliar territory, resistance would accomplish nothing but injury. They allowed themselves to be escorted through the forest, deeper into Vaymont land, toward whatever waited ahead. The Vaymont packhouse came into view as the afternoon light began to fade, a structure built from dark stone that seemed to rise directly out of the surrounding cliffs, imposing in a way that Ashmore's warmer, wood-built halls had never been. Naomi felt a fresh wave of nerves settle over her as they were led through the front gates, past warriors who watched their arrival with open curiosity. They were brought to a large hall where a man sat waiting near a long table, his posture relaxed but alert, the kind of stillness that suggested someone who had learned long ago never to be caught off guard. He rose slowly as they entered, and Naomi found herself studying him despite her exhaustion. He was tall, with dark hair, and sharp, assessing eyes that missed nothing as they swept over her and Grace. There was a quiet intensity to him, something guarded beneath his composed exterior, though Naomi could not have said exactly what led her to that impression. "Alpha King Damien," the lead warrior said, inclining his head respectfully. "We found these 2 near the eastern stream, Ashmore wolves." Something flickered across Damien's face at the mention of Ashmore, gone too quickly for Naomi to fully read. "Ashmore," he repeated, his voice low and controlled. "That is a name I do not often hear spoken kindly on my land." "We are not here to cause trouble," Naomi said, stepping forward slightly despite Grace's cautioning hand on her arm. "We left Ashmore. We have no connection to their leadership anymore." Damien's sharp eyes settled fully on her, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away, though something in her refused to. "Explain." Naomi hesitated only briefly before deciding, once again, that honesty was the only path forward. "Alpha King Roderick chose to publicly humiliate me in favor of another woman. I left rather than remain and be treated as an afterthought in my own home." The hall had gone quiet, every warrior present listening carefully, and Naomi was suddenly, acutely aware of how vulnerable her honesty had just made her. But Damien's expression, rather than hardening further, seemed to shift into something closer to understanding, though he quickly masked it behind careful neutrality. Roderick's reputation for arrogance is well known even here, Damien said finally. It does not surprise me that his cruelty extends to those closest to him. You know him? Naomi asked. Our territories share a long and complicated history, Damien said, his tone giving nothing else away. One that predates either of us. He studied her for another long moment, and Naomi found herself standing straighter under his gaze, refusing to let exhaustion or fear diminish her further after everything she had already endured. You have traveled far, and you look like you have not eaten properly in days, Damien said finally, his tone shifting into something more practical. Whatever quarrel exists between Vaemont and Ashmore is not yours to carry. You will be given food and shelter tonight. Naomi felt a rush of relief, so strong it nearly buckled her knees, though she kept her composure carefully in place. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, Damien said, turning to instruct one of his warriors to see them settled. Hospitality here is not unconditional. You will explain yourselves further once you have rested. As they were led away from the hall, Naomi glanced back once, and found Damien still watching her, his expression unreadable, though something in the intensity of his gaze suggested he was already turning over more questions than he had asked aloud. She did not know yet what role Vaemont, or its guarded Alpha King, would play in the life she was still trying to rebuild from nothing, but for the first time since leaving Ashmore, walking into unfamiliar shelter that offered warmth instead of humiliation, Naomi allowed herself a small, cautious breath of relief. Whatever came next, at least for tonight, she and Grace were safe. Naomi woke the next morning to unfamiliar sunlight filtering through a window she did not recognize, and for a brief, disoriented moment, she forgot everything that had happened over the past week. Then the memories returned all at once, the humiliation at the gathering, the long journey through unclaimed land, the sharp-eyed Alpha King, who had offered them shelter, with careful conditions attached. She sat up slowly in the unfamiliar bed, taking in the simple, well-kept room around her, before rising to find Grace already awake, sitting near the small window overlooking the Vaemont training grounds below. You should see this, Grace said, gesturing for Naomi to join her. Naomi crossed the room and looked down at the yard, where dozens of warriors moved through disciplined drills, despite the early hour, their movements sharp and coordinated, in a way that spoke of serious, consistent training. Among them, unmistakable even from this distance, stood Damien, moving through the formations with an ease that suggested he trained alongside his warriors regularly, rather than simply commanding from a distance. He does not strike me as the kind of Alpha King who rules from behind walls, Grace observed. No, Naomi agreed quietly, watching as Damien corrected a younger warrior's stance with patient, careful instruction, rather than harsh criticism. He does not. A knock at the door interrupted their observation, and a young woman entered, carrying a tray of food, along with a message that the Alpha King wished to speak with them once they had eaten. Naomi felt her stomach tighten with nerves, uncertain what conditions Damien might attach to their continued presence, but she forced herself to eat properly, knowing she would need her strength for whatever conversation awaited. They were led to a smaller, more private room an hour later, where Damien waited alone, seated near a window that overlooked the surrounding cliffs. He gestured for them to sit, and Naomi noted, with some surprise, that his advisors were absent from this particular meeting. I trust you slept well, he said, his tone politely formal but not unkind. We did, Naomi said. Thank you again for your hospitality. You mentioned yesterday that you have no connection to Ashmore's leadership, Damien said, moving directly to the point. I would like to understand more clearly what that means, and what your intentions are now that you have arrived on Vaemont land. Naomi took a steadying breath before answering. I was Roderick's intended mate. 3 weeks before our ceremony, I discovered he had continued a relationship with a woman named Camille Voss, someone from an allied family with significant influence in Ashmore's southern trade routes. When I confronted him, he denied it, and days later, he publicly announced her as his closest advisor, in a way that made his intentions clear to the entire pack. Damien's expression remained carefully neutral, though Naomi noticed a slight tightening around his eyes at the mention of Camille's name. Camille Voss, he repeated. That name is not unfamiliar to me either. You know her as well? Naomi asked, curiosity briefly overtaking her caution. Vaemont and the Voss family have their own complicated history, Damien said, his tone giving little else away. 1. I have no particular interest in discussing further at present. Naomi did not push, sensing clearly that whatever history existed there was not hers to ask about, not yet, perhaps not ever. Instead, she waited, allowing Damien to continue steering the conversation toward whatever conclusions he had already begun forming. You have no pack now, Damien said finally. No protection, no standing, and by your own admission, powerful enemies within Ashmore's leadership who may not take kindly to your departure. I am aware of my situation, Naomi said, keeping her voice steady, despite the uncomfortable truth of his words. I am not stating it to unsettle you, Damien said, something almost gentle entering his tone despite its continued formality. I am stating it because it affects what I am about to offer. Naomi straightened slightly, exchanging a brief glance with Grace. What are you offering? Sanctuary, Damien said, for as long as you require it. In exchange, I would ask that you contribute to the pack, in whatever capacity suits your skills. Vaemont does not offer charity without purpose, but neither do we turn away those in genuine need. Naomi studied him carefully, searching for any hidden motive behind the offer, any indication that this generosity came with strings she had not yet been told about. But Damien's expression remained steady, patient, offering nothing but the plain terms he had already stated. Why would you help someone connected to Ashmore, even indirectly? Naomi asked. Given whatever history exists between our packs, I would expect suspicion, not sanctuary. Something shifted in Damien's expression, a flicker of old pain quickly suppressed beneath careful control. Because I understand better than most what it feels like to be discarded by someone who was supposed to value you, he said quietly. And I have no interest in adding to that particular kind of suffering, regardless of which pack it originates from. The admission surprised Naomi, both in its honesty and in the brief vulnerability it revealed beneath Damien's guarded exterior. She wanted to ask more, to understand what history had shaped that particular wound, but she recognized the careful walls he had already begun rebuilding around the admission, and she respected them. Thank you, she said instead. We accept your offer, and we will do whatever work is needed to earn our place here. Damien nodded once, satisfied, before rising to signal the conversation's conclusion. You will be given proper quarters, and I will have someone show you the grounds this afternoon. Vaemont operates differently than Ashmore in many respects. It will take time to adjust. As they left the meeting, Grace turned to Naomi with a thoughtful expression. He is not at all what I expected from an enemy Alpha King. No, Naomi agreed slowly. He is not. Over the following days, Naomi began to understand more clearly what Grace meant. Where Ashmore had operated on careful hierarchies and political maneuvering, Vaemont functioned on discipline and mutual respect that seemed to flow both directions between Damien and his pack. Warriors spoke to him directly, without excessive formality. Elders offered genuine counsel, rather than careful flattery. Even the youngest pups seemed to approach him without the fear Naomi had often seen directed toward Roderick. She spent her first week assisting with the pack's medical stores, drawing on skills she had developed over years of managing Ashmore's own supplies, and found unexpected satisfaction in work that asked nothing of her except competence and care. Grace, meanwhile, found her place training alongside the younger warriors, her natural instincts for combat finally given proper outlet after years of restraint within Ashmore's more rigid structure. It was during her second week that Naomi encountered Damien again, in circumstances less formal than their initial meeting. She had been walking near the training grounds in the early evening when she found him alone, working through a series of exercises long after the other warriors had dispersed for the night. You train alone often? She asked, approaching cautiously. Damien glanced up, momentarily startled, before his expression settled into something more composed. It helps me think, he admitted. The pack has enough to manage without watching their king work through frustration in front of them. What frustration? Naomi asked, genuinely curious. He hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share. Border tensions, he said eventually. Ashmore has grown bolder in recent months, testing our eastern lines more frequently than usual. Roderick seems intent on expanding his influence, regardless of the cost to peace between our territories. Naomi felt a chill at the mention of Roderick's continued ambitions. old instincts warning her that whatever conflict was brewing between these two packs would not remain distant from her own life for long. Do you believe it will lead to open conflict? I believe Roderick has never learned the value of restraint, Damien said, something hard entering his tone. But that is a concern for another day. Tonight, you should not be standing out here worrying over Ashmore's ambitions. Old habits, Naomi admitted with a small, tired smile. Damien studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his sharp eyes. You are stronger than you give yourself credit for, he said finally. Most who arrive here carrying the kind of betrayal you described spend months unable to function properly. You have spent 2 weeks quietly rebuilding yourself as though it were simply another task to complete. Naomi felt heat rise in her cheeks at the unexpected observation, uncertain how to respond to praise so direct and sincere. What choice do I have? She said eventually. Falling apart accomplishes nothing. No, Damien agreed quietly. It does not. They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment longer, before Naomi excused herself for the evening, aware suddenly of how easily conversation flowed between them, despite the short time they had known each other. Aware, too, of the careful way Damien's guarded exterior seemed to soften, just slightly, whenever they spoke. She did not know yet what that meant, or where it might lead, but walking back toward her quarters beneath Veymont's cold, clear sky, Naomi allowed herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, to feel something that resembled hope. 3 months passed, and Veymont slowly stopped feeling like a refuge and started feeling like home. Naomi had settled into a rhythm she never could have imagined during her final weeks at Ashmore. Her mornings began early, overseeing the pack's growing medical stores, alongside an elder healer named Ivy, who had taken to Naomi's careful, organized nature with genuine appreciation. Her afternoons often found her assisting with trade negotiations, a skill she had developed unintentionally through years of watching Ashmore's councils, though she quickly discovered Veymont valued directness in ways Ashmore's elders never had. You have a gift for this, Ivy told her one afternoon, watching Naomi finalize an agreement with a visiting trader from the Northern Territories. Most who arrive here as outsiders take years to earn this kind of trust. I am simply doing my part, Naomi said, though the compliment settled warmly in her chest. You are doing considerably more than your part, Ivy said with a knowing smile, though I suspect I know at least part of your motivation. Naomi felt heat rise in her cheeks, understanding immediately what Ivy was implying. Over the past 3 months, her relationship with Damien had shifted gradually, from cautious formality into something warmer, built through countless small moments, rather than any single dramatic turning point. Shared meals during long council sessions, quiet evening walks along the training grounds after the pack had settled for the night. The easy way Damien had begun seeking her opinion on matters beyond her official responsibilities, trusting her judgment in ways that Roderick had never bothered to. She had not expected to feel this way again, had assumed after Roderick's betrayal that trust would take years to rebuild, if it ever returned at all. But something about Damien's steady, unwavering honesty had slowly worn down the careful walls she had built around herself. It is not what you think, Naomi said, though her protest lacked real conviction. It is exactly what I think, Ivy said, laughing softly. And frankly, it is about time. That man has spent years guarding himself so carefully that half this pack worried he would never let anyone close again. What happened to him? Naomi asked carefully. He mentioned once that he understood betrayal, but he never explained further. Ivy's expression sobered slightly. That is not my story to tell, child. If he wishes you to know, he will share it himself. But I will say this. Whatever wound he carries runs deep, and the fact that he has allowed himself to grow close to you at all speaks to how much he has come to trust you. Naomi thought about those words for the rest of the day, turning them over carefully as she finished her tasks and made her way toward the training grounds that evening, where she had grown accustomed to finding Damien working through his exercises after the pack had settled. He was there as expected, moving through familiar drills beneath the fading evening light, though he paused when he noticed her approach, a small, genuine smile crossing his face that still, after 3 months, sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. You look thoughtful tonight, he observed, wiping sweat from his brow as he crossed toward her. Ivy mentioned something today, Naomi said carefully, about whatever happened to you before I arrived. Damien's expression shifted, old guardedness briefly returning before he seemed to consciously push it aside. I suppose it is only fair, given how openly you shared your own story when you first arrived here. They settled together on a low stone bench near the edge of the training grounds, and Damien was quiet for a long moment before finally speaking. Before I became Alpha King, I was intended for a mate from an allied territory, he said slowly. Her name was Rosalind. We were young, and I believed, foolishly, that our bond was built on genuine affection rather than political convenience. Naomi listened carefully, sensing the weight behind each word. 3 months before our ceremony, I discovered she had been maintaining a relationship with a warrior from her own territory throughout our entire courtship. Damien continued, his voice carefully controlled despite the old pain evident beneath it. When confronted, she admitted she had only agreed to our match for the political advantages it offered her family. She left the night before our ceremony, taking a significant portion of Veymont's shared trade agreements with her, agreements her family conveniently claimed had never truly been finalized. Damien, Naomi said softly, I am so sorry. It was a long time ago, he said, though his tone suggested the wound had never fully healed. But it taught me caution. I stopped trusting easily after that. Stopped believing that anyone could want me for reasons beyond what I could offer them politically or materially. And yet you offered me sanctuary the moment we arrived, Naomi said, with no political advantage to gain from it at all. No, Damien agreed quietly. There was no advantage in helping you, which is perhaps why I trusted the decision to begin with. Naomi felt something shift in her chest at his words, understanding suddenly the depth of vulnerability behind his careful honesty. Thank you for trusting me with this. You have earned considerably more trust than this small story, Damien said, turning to look at her directly, something warm and steady in his gaze that made her breath catch slightly. Naomi, I need to be honest with you about something else as well. What is it? She asked. These past months, working alongside you, watching you rebuild your life here with such quiet strength, he said carefully, I find myself caring for you in ways I did not expect to feel again, ways I was certain I had permanently closed myself off from after Rosalind. Naomi's heart raced at his admission, though old caution immediately rose alongside the warmth spreading through her chest. Damien, I do not want either of us to move too quickly. What Roderick did to me still weighs heavily, and I would not want you to feel pressured into something before you are truly ready either. I am not speaking from pressure, Damien said gently. I am speaking from 3 months of watching you choose honesty and strength over bitterness, even after everything you endured. I am not asking you to make any decisions tonight. I only wanted you to know how I feel, honestly, without hiding behind careful formality any longer. Naomi studied him for a long moment, weighing his words against her own carefully guarded heart. Unlike Roderick, whose affection had always felt conditional on her usefulness to his ambitions, Damien's honesty asked nothing of her except the same openness he had just offered. I care for you as well, she admitted quietly. More than I expected to, given everything that happened before I arrived here. But I need time, Damien. I need to be certain that what I feel is real, and not simply relief at finally being treated with basic decency, after years of settling for less. Take whatever time you need, Damien said, reaching out to gently take her hand, the gesture careful and respectful rather than demanding. I have waited years to feel this way again. I can wait a little longer to be certain you are ready as well. They sat together beneath the darkening sky, hands loosely intertwined, and Naomi felt, for the first time since arriving in Veymont, that whatever came next in her life might genuinely be built on foundations far stronger than anything she had known before. She did not yet know how quickly that foundation would be tested, or how soon news of her presence in Veymont would find its way back to Ashmore's walls. But sitting there in the quiet evening, hand in hand with a man who had offered her nothing but honesty since the moment they met, Naomi allowed herself to simply exist in that peace, undisturbed, for just a little while longer. The bonding ceremony took place on a clear winter morning, 6 months after Naomi first arrived on Veymont land, and it looked nothing like the elaborate spectacle Ashmore had once planned for her wedding to Roderick. There were no elaborate decorations, no carefully staged political displays meant to impress visiting dignitaries. Instead, the Veymont pack gathered simply in the training grounds where Naomi had spent so many quiet evenings with Damien, warriors and elders and children standing together, without the rigid hierarchy that had always defined similar gatherings back in Ashmore. Naomi wore a simple dress, the deep blue color of Veymont's banners, her hair loose and unadorned, feeling more genuinely herself in that moment than she had felt during any of the elaborate preparations for her intended ceremony with Roderick. Grace stood beside her, tears bright in her eyes, while Ivy fussed quietly with the final details of the small gathering. "You do not have to do this if any part of you still hesitates," Grace said quietly, squeezing Naomi's hand. "I have never been more certain of anything," Naomi said, and she meant it completely. The past 3 months, since Damien's honest admission beneath the evening sky, had only deepened her certainty. She had watched him lead his pack with the same steady honesty he had shown her from their very first meeting, had watched him make difficult decisions with genuine consideration for those affected, rather than pure political calculation. She had come to understand, gradually and completely, that what she had believed love should feel like with Roderick had been nothing compared to the genuine partnership she had found with Damien. When she stepped forward to stand before him at the center of the training grounds, surrounded by the pack that had welcomed her so completely, Damien's expression held none of the careful guardedness she remembered from their first meeting. Instead, there was only open warmth, steady and certain, matched perfectly by her own. "Naomi," he said, his voice carrying easily across the quiet gathering. "6 months ago, you arrived on my land as a stranger, carrying wounds from a betrayal that would have broken many people permanently. Instead, you rebuilt yourself with a strength I have rarely witnessed, and in doing so, you taught me that trust could still be possible, even after everything I believed had closed that possibility permanently." Naomi felt tears gathering, despite her best efforts to remain composed, though for the first time in longer than she could remember, they were tears of genuine happiness rather than grief. "I promise you honesty, always," Damien continued, "even when it is difficult. I promise you partnership, not simply loyalty demanded without reason, and I promise you a place here that will never require you to diminish yourself for the sake of anyone else's ambition." When it was Naomi's turn to speak, her voice remained steady despite the emotion building in her chest. "Damien, you offered me sanctuary when I had nothing to give you in return, expecting nothing except honest effort. You have shown me, every single day since, what genuine partnership looks like. I promise you, the same honesty you have always offered me, and I promise to stand beside you, not simply behind you, in whatever challenges Veymont faces in the years ahead." The bonding itself was simple, the exchange of Veymont's traditional pledge, accompanied by the quiet mark that would forever tie their fates together. And as it settled into place, Naomi felt something shift deep within her, a sense of belonging she had never experienced during her entire time with Roderick, despite years of trying desperately to earn exactly that feeling. The pack erupted into genuine celebration around them, warmth and joy replacing the careful formality Naomi had always associated with such ceremonies. Children ran between the gathered warriors, laughing freely, while Ivy embraced her warmly, tears streaming openly down her weathered face. "Welcome home, truly," Ivy said. Not as a guest anymore, but as Veymont's queen. The title still felt unfamiliar on Naomi's ears, though not unwelcome. She had spent years striving to earn the title of Luna within Ashmore, only to watch that effort discarded the moment Roderick decided she was no longer politically useful. This felt entirely different, earned not through careful political maneuvering, but through genuine trust, built slowly over months of honest partnership. As the celebration continued into the evening, Damien found her standing quietly near the edge of the gathering, watching the warmth and joy surrounding them, with a sense of wonder she still had not fully processed. "You seem lost in thought," he observed, settling beside her. "I am simply grateful," Naomi said. "6 months ago, I arrived here with nothing, uncertain whether I would even survive the journey through unclaimed territory, let alone find something like this waiting on the other side. Veymont is fortunate to have you," Damien said, "and I am considerably more fortunate than that." They stood together, watching the celebration continue around them, when a warrior approached with careful urgency, interrupting the peaceful evening, with news that immediately shifted the atmosphere. "My king," the warrior said, bowing briefly, "word has reached us from a trader traveling through the Eastern Territories. News of tonight's bonding ceremony has already begun spreading beyond Veymont's borders. Damien's expression sharpened slightly. How far has word traveled? Far enough that Ashmore will likely hear of it within days, if they have not already, the warrior said. Naomi felt a chill settle over her despite the warmth of the celebration continuing around them, old anxiety resurfacing at the mention of Roderick's territory. She had known, somewhere in the back of her mind, that news of her new position would eventually reach Ashmore. She had simply hoped for more time before that reality arrived. Let them hear, Damien said finally, his voice steady and unbothered. Naomi's happiness here is not something that requires Ashmore's approval or acknowledgement. Roderick will not take the news well, Naomi said quietly. Not because he still wants me, but because his pride will not tolerate the idea that I found genuine happiness with his greatest rival. Then his pride is his own burden to carry, Damien said firmly. It will not diminish anything we have built here. Naomi appreciated his confidence, though old instincts warned her that Roderick's reaction would likely prove more complicated than simple wounded pride. She had known him for 6 years. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, how deeply his sense of authority was tied to public perception, and how dangerously he might react to any perceived challenge against it. We should prepare for the possibility of complications, Naomi said carefully. Roderick does not handle perceived humiliation gracefully. Vaemont has weathered Ashmore's provocations before, Damien said. We will weather whatever comes next as well, together. The word settled warmly in Naomi's chest, despite her lingering concerns. Together. Not simply as Luna standing quietly behind an Alpha King's decisions, but as genuine partners facing whatever challenges arose side by side. The celebration continued late into the night, warmth and laughter filling the training grounds long after the messenger's troubling news had been absorbed into the pack's collective awareness. But as Naomi finally retired that evening, settling beside Damien in the quiet warmth of their shared quarters, she found herself thinking carefully about what challenges the coming weeks might bring. She had built something genuine here, something worth protecting. And she understood, with a clarity that settled deep into her bones, that whatever Roderick's reaction proved to be, she would face it not as the discarded Luna, who had once fled Ashmore in humiliation, but as Vaemont's queen, standing firmly beside a partner who valued her completely. Whatever came next, she would not face it alone. The formal summons arrived 2 weeks later, carried by a neutral messenger wearing the colors of the Central Alliance, the loose council of territories that maintained peace agreements between the region's various packs. Naomi was reviewing trade documents in the small office she had claimed as her own when Damien found her, his expression carefully controlled in a way she had learned meant serious news. The Alliance has called a summit, he said, holding out the formal parchment bearing the council's seal. Ashmore requested it directly, citing unresolved matters concerning territorial stability. Naomi took the parchment, scanning the carefully formal language that nonetheless made its true purpose clear enough. This is about me. The language is vague enough to claim otherwise, Damien said, but yes, I suspect Roderick has manufactured this summit specifically to address your presence here. Naomi felt old anxiety twist in her stomach, though she forced herself to remain composed. She had known this moment would eventually arrive, had spent the past 2 weeks quietly preparing herself for whatever confrontation Roderick's wounded pride might eventually demand. But knowing it was coming, and facing the reality of it were entirely different experiences. When is the summit? She asked. 6 days from now, at the Alliance's neutral grounds along the northern border, Damien said. All territory leaders are required to attend, along with any relevant parties the council deems necessary to the discussion. Meaning me, Naomi said quietly. Meaning you, Damien confirmed, though you do not have to attend if you are not ready to face him directly. Naomi considered the offer for a long moment, old fear warring against a steadily growing sense of resolve that had been building within her since her first weeks in Vaemont. She thought of every year she had spent quietly enduring Roderick's coldness, every excuse she had accepted, every humiliation she had swallowed for the sake of pack unity. She thought of the woman she had been when she fled Ashmore in the dark, uncertain and frightened, carrying nothing but a small bag and Grace's steady support. She was not that woman anymore. I want to attend, Naomi said finally, her voice steady with conviction. I have spent enough years allowing Roderick to control the narrative of my life without challenge. If he wishes to address my presence here directly, I intend to be present to speak for myself. Something like pride flickered across Damien's expression, quickly followed by careful concern. Are you certain? Facing him publicly again will not be easy, regardless of how much you have grown since leaving. I am certain, Naomi said. 6 months ago, I left Ashmore in silence, allowing my absence to speak for itself. This time, I intend to speak for myself directly. The following days passed in careful preparation, Naomi working closely with Ivy and several of Veymont's senior advisors to understand exactly what political implications the summit might carry, beyond the personal confrontation she anticipated. She learned that Ashmore's recent border tensions with Veymont had grown more serious in recent months, with several minor skirmishes along contested territory lines that the Alliance Council viewed with genuine concern. Roderick may be using this summit for more than simple pride, Ivy warned during one of their preparation sessions. If he can paint Veymont as the aggressor in these border disputes, and frame your presence here as evidence of some deeper conspiracy against Ashmore's stability, he could potentially rally Alliance support against Damien's territory. That sounds remarkably calculated for wounded pride, Naomi said. Roderick has always been calculating, Ivy said. His pride simply gives him additional motivation to pursue advantages he might otherwise hesitate to claim. Naomi absorbed this information carefully, understanding now that the coming summit carried stakes far beyond her own personal confrontation with the man who had once discarded her so publicly. Whatever happened at that meeting would potentially shape the political future of both territories, and she intended to ensure that Roderick's manipulation did not succeed in painting Veymont, or herself, as anything other than exactly what they were. The morning of the summit arrived clear and cold, the neutral grounds along the northern border already crowded with representatives from various territories throughout the region. By the time Veymont's delegation arrived, Naomi rode beside Damien, dressed in Veymont's deep blue colors, her composure carefully maintained despite the nervous energy building steadily in her chest. She saw Roderick before he saw her, standing near the central gathering tent, surrounded by several Ashmore elders, Camille positioned prominently at his side, in a deep red dress that seemed deliberately chosen to draw attention. Naomi felt old, familiar anxiety twist through her at the sight of them together, though she forced herself to breathe steadily, reminding herself of everything she had built in the 6 months since fleeing that life. Roderick's expression shifted the moment he noticed her arrival, surprise quickly masked behind careful neutrality, though Naomi caught the brief flash of something else beneath it, something that looked almost like genuine shock at seeing her standing confidently beside Damien, rather than hiding in humiliated retreat. Alpha King Roderick, Damien said formally as their delegations drew closer, his tone carrying just enough edge to acknowledge the tension between them without breaching formal courtesy. I understand you requested this summit personally. I did, Roderick said, his eyes flickering briefly toward Naomi, before settling back on Damien. There are matters concerning territorial stability that require direct discussion between our packs. Then let us begin, Damien said. I trust the Alliance Council is prepared to hear all relevant perspectives. They were led into the central gathering tent, where representatives from a dozen different territories had assembled around a large formal table, the Alliance's senior council member, an elderly alpha named Felix, presiding over the proceedings with careful neutrality. We are gathered today to address rising tensions along the Ashmore-Veymont border, Felix began, his voice carrying easily across the crowded tent. Alpha King Roderick, you requested this summit. Please state your concerns formally. Roderick rose slowly, his composure carefully rebuilt, despite whatever surprise he had felt at Naomi's confident presence. Over the past several months, Veymont's warriors have increased patrols along contested border regions, testing Ashmore's defensive lines with growing frequency. I believe this escalation coincides suspiciously with Alpha King Damien's decision to harbor a former Ashmore Luna within his territory, suggesting a deliberate provocation rather than simple coincidence. Murmurs moved through the gathered representatives, and Naomi felt every eye in the tent shift briefly toward her. She kept her expression carefully composed, refusing to let Roderick's careful framing intimidate her into silence. I would like to address that claim directly, Naomi said, rising before Damien could respond on her behalf. Felix inclined his head toward her. You may speak. I did not flee Ashmore as part of any conspiracy against my former pack, Naomi said, her voice steady, despite the weight of every gaze fixed upon her. I left because Alpha King Roderick publicly humiliated me in favor of another woman, weeks before our intended bonding ceremony. After years of quiet betrayal, I had foolishly chosen to overlook for the sake of pack unity. Roderick's jaw tightened visibly, though he said nothing, apparently unwilling to directly contradict a claim that too many Ashmore elders present could likely confirm. Vaymont offered me sanctuary when I had nowhere else to turn, Naomi continued. Not as part of any calculated political strategy, but simply because Alpha King Damien showed the basic decency that Roderick never extended to me during 6 years of supposed partnership. Whatever border tensions exist between these territories predate my arrival, and framing my presence as their cause is nothing more than a convenient distraction from Ashmore's own expanding ambitions. The tent fell silent for a long moment, the weight of her words settling over the gathered representatives. Naomi could see several alliance members exchanging thoughtful glances, clearly reconsidering the narrative Roderick had attempted to construct. That is a serious accusation, Felix said carefully, looking between Naomi and Roderick. Alpha King Roderick, do you dispute this account? Roderick's silence stretched long enough to answer the question more clearly than any words could have. I do not deny that our courtship ended difficultly, Roderick said finally, his voice carrying less confidence than before. But that is a private matter, unrelated to legitimate concerns about Vaymont's military posturing along our shared border. Private matters do not typically involve public humiliation in front of an entire gathered pack, Naomi said, nor do they typically involve elevating another woman to a position of political influence within weeks of discarding a mate you had spent 6 years cultivating publicly. Camille shifted uncomfortably beside Roderick, and Naomi noticed several Ashmore elders present, exchanging uneasy glances, clearly recognizing the accuracy of her account, even if none of them chose to speak in her defense. This is a distraction from the true purpose of this summit, Roderick said, attempting to regain control of the narrative. Regardless of the personal circumstances between myself and Naomi, the border tensions remain a legitimate concern, requiring resolution. Then let us discuss those border tensions honestly, Damien said, rising to stand beside Naomi. Vaymont's increased patrols began only after Ashmore's own warriors were discovered testing our defensive lines 3 months ago, an incident your own border commander can confirm if questioned directly. Felix's expression sharpened with interest. Is this true, Alpha King Roderick? Roderick hesitated, clearly caught between denying an accusation that apparently had witnesses and admitting to provocations he had hoped to obscure through this very summit. There may have been minor incidents, he said carefully, though nothing that justified the scale of Vaymont's response. Minor incidents that Ashmore's own warriors initiated, Damien said firmly, which Vaymont responded to with appropriate caution rather than aggression. I would welcome a full alliance investigation into the actual sequence of events, rather than continued accusations based on convenient timing alone. Felix considered this for a long moment before addressing the gathered council. It seems there is considerably more complexity to this situation than initially presented. I propose the Alliance conduct a formal investigation into the border incidents, with testimony gathered from both territories' warriors, before any further accusations are entertained. Several council members nodded their agreement, and Naomi felt a small measure of relief at seeing Roderick's careful narrative beginning to unravel under genuine scrutiny. But the moment of relief proved short-lived, when Camille rose suddenly, apparently unwilling to allow the conversation to continue without her own intervention. If I may speak, Camille said, her voice carrying a practiced sweetness that immediately put Naomi on guard. I understand emotions run high, given the personal history involved, but I believe Naomi's account conveniently omits certain details. What details would those be? Felix asked. Naomi struggled considerably with the pressures of her position within Ashmore's leadership, Camille said, her tone carrying false sympathy that made Naomi's skin crawl. Roderick confided in me, as a trusted advisor, about genuine concerns regarding her capability to manage the responsibilities expected of Ashmore's Luna. Our closer working relationship developed naturally from those concerns, not from any deliberate betrayal. Naomi felt anger flare sharp and sudden in her chest, though she forced herself to remain composed, recognizing the careful manipulation embedded within Camille's words. That is an interesting claim, she said evenly, particularly given that I managed Ashmore's medical stores, trade negotiations, and dispute resolutions independently for 6 years. without a single formal complaint recorded regarding my capabilities during that entire time. Perceptions can differ from official records, Camille said smoothly. Then perhaps the Alliance should review Ashmore's actual governance records directly, Naomi said, rather than relying on convenient claims offered without any supporting evidence. Felix's expression had grown increasingly skeptical throughout Camille's intervention, and he raised a hand to still further debate. I believe we have gathered sufficient information for today's proceedings. The Alliance will conduct a formal investigation into both the border incidents and the circumstances surrounding this personal dispute, given how directly the two matters appear intertwined. With respect, Roderick said, clearly attempting to salvage some control over the outcome, I do not believe a formal investigation into personal matters serves any legitimate purpose for this council. On the contrary, Felix said firmly, given that these personal matters appear directly connected to accusations of military provocation between two territories, understanding the full truth serves the Alliance's core purpose of maintaining regional stability. This summit is concluded. Formal investigators will be dispatched to both territories within the week. The gathering began dispersing slowly, representatives exchanging quiet conversations as they departed the central tent. Naomi felt Damien's steady presence beside her, grounding her as the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly began fading. You handled that with remarkable composure, Damien said quietly, as they made their way back toward Veymont's delegation. I have had 6 months to prepare for this conversation, Naomi said, though her hands trembled slightly now that the immediate confrontation had passed. I did not expect Camille to attack my competency so directly. She revealed more about her own insecurities than she likely intended, Damien observed. Anyone paying attention could see how carefully she avoided any specific evidence to support her claims. They had nearly reached the edge of the gathering grounds when Naomi felt a hand catch her arm, turning to find Roderick standing close behind her, his expression carrying none of the composed authority he had maintained throughout the formal proceedings. Was this truly necessary? He asked quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Humiliating me in front of the entire Alliance Council? You humiliated yourself, Roderick, Naomi said evenly, pulling her arm free from his grip. I simply refused to remain silent about it any longer. I offered you everything, Roderick said, something almost desperate entering his voice. Status, security, a future as Ashmore's Luna, and you threw it away to align yourself with my greatest rival, out of what? Spite. Naomi studied him for a long moment, searching for any trace of the man she had once believed she loved, finding instead only wounded pride and careful self-justification. I did not align myself with Damien out of spite, she said finally. I found genuine partnership with him, something you never once offered me during 6 years together. You gave me status and security, Roderick, but you never gave me respect, and eventually, that proved to matter considerably more than anything else you claimed to offer. She turned and walked away without waiting for his response, rejoining Damien and Veymont's delegation as they prepared for the journey home. She did not look back, though she could feel Roderick's gaze following her the entire distance, heavy with a mixture of anger and something that might have been genuine regret, though she no longer had any interest in determining which emotion truly dominated. The formal investigation that followed over the coming weeks would ultimately prove far more damaging to Ashmore's standing than Roderick had ever anticipated when he first called for this summit, though Naomi would not learn the full extent of those consequences until several weeks later, when the true scope of Camille's manipulations finally came to light. The Alliance investigators arrived at Veymont 2 weeks after the summit, led by a careful, methodical alpha named Caleb, who spent several days interviewing warriors, reviewing patrol records, and gathering testimony, with a thoroughness that Naomi found genuinely reassuring. Your border commander's records are remarkably detailed, Caleb observed during one of his final interviews with Naomi and Damien. This level of documentation will make our findings considerably clearer than the version Ashmore initially presented. We have nothing to hide, Damien said, unlike Roderick, apparently. Caleb's investigation revealed exactly what Damien had claimed during the summit. Ashmore's warriors had indeed initiated the initial border incursions 3 months earlier, testing Veymont's defensive lines under Roderick's direct orders, apparently as part of a broader strategy to expand Ashmore's territorial influence, while regional attention remained focused on other matters. Veymont's subsequent increased patrols had been purely defensive, exactly as Damien had stated. But the investigation uncovered something considerably more damaging than simple border provocations. While reviewing Ashmore's internal records, Caleb's team discovered evidence that Camille had been actively manipulating trade agreements between Ashmore and her own family's territory for months, diverting resources meant for pack-wide distribution into private accounts controlled by the Voss family, all while Roderick remained apparently unaware of the full extent of her manipulation. This goes considerably beyond simple political ambition, Caleb reported, during a formal briefing held at Vaymont, 3 weeks after his investigation began. Camille Voss appears to have been systematically undermining Ashmore's financial stability for personal gain, using her relationship with Alpha King Roderick to access resources and authority she would not otherwise have possessed. Naomi absorbed this information with a complicated mixture of vindication and genuine surprise. She had known Camille was manipulative, had experienced that manipulation directly during their confrontation at the summit. But the scale of what Caleb's investigation had uncovered exceeded anything she had anticipated. "Does Roderick know?" Naomi asked. "The Alliance formally presented these findings to him 3 days ago," Caleb said. His reaction suggested genuine shock, though whether that shock reflects true ignorance or simply surprise at being caught remains a matter for Ashmore's own internal governance to determine. News of the scandal spread quickly through the region's various territories over the following weeks. Ashmore's carefully cultivated reputation for stable, prosperous leadership crumbling rapidly under the weight of Camille's exposed manipulations. Naomi received updates periodically through Alliance channels, learning that several of Ashmore's own elders had begun openly questioning Roderick's judgment, both regarding the border provocations he had personally ordered and his apparent blindness to Camille's financial manipulations, occurring directly under his authority. "It seems Roderick's ambition finally caught up with him," Grace observed one evening, reading through the latest Alliance report with evident satisfaction. "I take no pleasure in Ashmore's instability," Naomi said, though her tone carried less conviction than her words suggested. "Many good people still live within those walls, people who deserve better leadership than what Roderick has provided." "You are more generous than he deserves," Grace said. Naomi could not entirely disagree, though she found herself reflecting more on her own transformation than on any satisfaction at Roderick's unraveling authority. 6 months ago, she had fled Ashmore in humiliated silence, uncertain whether she would survive the journey through unclaimed territory, let alone build any kind of meaningful life afterward. Now, she stood as Vaymont's queen, respected by warriors and elders alike, married to a partner who valued her judgment and treated her as an equal in every aspect of their shared responsibilities. The true resolution came nearly a month after the summit, when a formal delegation arrived at Vaymont's gates, carrying urgent news from Ashmore. Naomi and Damien received them in the main hall, both sensing immediately that whatever had occurred carried significant weight. Alpha King Roderick has been formally removed from leadership by unanimous vote of Ashmore's council, the lead delegate announced. Following the confirmed evidence of Camille Voss's financial manipulations and Roderick's own admitted role in ordering unauthorized border provocations against Vaymont territory, the elders determined that continued leadership under his authority posed unacceptable risk to pack stability. Naomi felt genuine shock at the announcement, having anticipated consequences for Roderick's actions but not necessarily complete removal from power. Who will lead Ashmore now? An interim council has been established, led by Elder Nathaniel, until a proper successor can be determined through traditional pack processes, the delegate explained. Camille Voss has been formally banished from Ashmore territory, along with her immediate family, given the severity of the financial crimes uncovered. "And Roderick himself?" Damien asked. "He has been stripped of his title and authority, but permitted to remain within Ashmore territory as a private citizen, given his long service to the pack prior to these recent events," the delegate said. The council felt this represented appropriate consequence without unnecessary cruelty. Naomi absorbed this news carefully, feeling a complicated mixture of emotions she had not fully anticipated. There was no triumphant satisfaction in learning that the man who had once discarded her so publicly now faced the complete collapse of everything he had built his identity around. Instead, she felt something closer to quiet closure, understanding finally that the consequences of his own choices had caught up with him, entirely independent of any action she herself had taken, beyond simply telling the truth when given the opportunity. "Thank you for bringing this news directly," Damien said to the delegation. Please convey to Ashmore's interim council that Vaymont remains open to rebuilding productive relations between our territories, given appropriate assurances regarding future border stability. After the delegation departed, Naomi remained standing quietly in the main hall, processing the full weight of everything that had unfolded since that terrible evening when she first discovered Roderick and Camille together in his study. Are you all right? Damien asked gently, coming to stand beside her. I am, Naomi said, and found she meant it completely. I expected to feel more satisfaction at this outcome. Instead, I mostly feel grateful that it is finally, truly over. Closure often feels quieter than people expect, Damien said, but that does not make it any less meaningful. Naomi nodded, leaning gently into his steady presence beside her. 6 months ago, she had believed her entire world had ended the night she discovered Roderick's betrayal. Now, standing in Vaymont's main hall as its queen, surrounded by a partnership built on genuine respect and honest partnership, she understood that her world had not ended at all. It had simply been given the chance to begin again, built this time on foundations considerably stronger than anything she had known before. 1 year after Naomi first arrived on Vaymont land, exhausted and uncertain, carrying nothing but a small bag and Grace's unwavering support, the pack gathered once again in the training grounds, this time to celebrate a very different occasion entirely. The morning had begun with careful preparations, Ivy overseeing final details, while Grace helped Naomi dress in deep blue robes that carried the formal weight of Vaymont's traditions. Today marked Naomi's official recognition ceremony. A formal alliance witnessed confirmation of her role as Vaymont's queen, an honor typically reserved for mates who had proven their genuine commitment and value to their chosen territory over a substantial period. Nervous? Grace asked, adjusting the final details of Naomi's formal attire. A little, Naomi admitted, though the nervousness carried none of the fear that had once accompanied her original ceremony preparations back in Ashmore. This felt different entirely, built on a year of genuine partnership rather than careful political obligation. The past year had brought considerable changes throughout the region. Ashmore had slowly stabilized under Nathaniel's careful interim leadership, eventually selecting a new permanent Alpha King through traditional pack processes, a younger leader named Adrian, who had impressed the council with his commitment to transparency and genuine consultation with pack members. Relations between Ashmore and Vaymont had gradually improved under this new leadership, old tensions slowly giving way to cautious but genuine cooperation. Roderick himself had largely faded from regional prominence, living quietly within Ashmore's borders as a private citizen, his once formidable influence reduced to nothing beyond the memory of what he had once possessed and ultimately lost through his own choices. Naomi occasionally received updates about his circumstances through alliance channels, though she found herself feeling increasingly little about whatever news reached her, the emotional weight of that old betrayal having finally, genuinely faded into simple, distant history. Camille had never been heard from again after her banishment, her family's territory absorbed into neighboring lands after the scandal left them politically and financially devastated. Naomi occasionally wondered what had become of her, though the curiosity carried no lingering resentment, simply distant acknowledgement of a chapter in her life that had closed completely. The gathering is ready, Ivy announced, entering the preparation room with a warm smile. Everyone is waiting. Naomi took a steadying breath before making her way toward the training grounds, where Vaymont's entire pack had assembled alongside representatives from several allied territories, including a small delegation from Ashmore itself, sent as a gesture of the improving relations between the two territories. Damien waited at the center of the gathering, dressed in formal Vaymont colors, his expression carrying the same warm steadiness she had come to rely upon so completely over the past year. As she approached, Naomi felt none of the anxiety that had once accompanied similar public moments during her years with Roderick, feeling instead only genuine confidence in the life she had built here, earned through honest partnership rather than careful political performance. Felix, representing the Alliance Council, stepped forward to formally begin the ceremony. We gather today to formally recognize Naomi as Queen of Vaymont, confirming her standing not merely through mate bond, but through demonstrated commitment and genuine contribution to this territory's stability and prosperity over the past year. He turned to address the gathered crowd directly. Under Naomi's guidance, Vaymont's medical resources have expanded considerably, reaching outlying territories that previously struggled with inadequate care. Trade negotiations conducted under her direct oversight have strengthened relationships with 3 additional territories, and her steady counsel alongside Alpha King Damien has helped guide this territory through what could have been a considerably more difficult transition following last year's regional instability. Naomi felt tears gathering as she listened to her contributions, formally acknowledged before the gathered crowd, understanding fully, for the first time, just how completely she had rebuilt her identity over the past year, transforming from someone who had once measured her worth entirely, through Roderick's approval, into someone whose value stood independently, recognized formally, by an entire regional council. Naomi, Felix continued, do you accept this formal recognition, along with the responsibilities it carries toward Veymont's continued prosperity? I do, Naomi said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent gathering, steady with genuine conviction. And Alpha King Damien, do you confirm Naomi's standing as your equal partner in Veymont's leadership, entitled to full authority and respect befitting her role? I do, without reservation, Damien said, reaching for Naomi's hand, with the same warm steadiness that had first drawn her toward him during those early, uncertain months following her arrival. The formal recognition concluded with genuine celebration, the pack erupting into warmth and joy that reminded Naomi powerfully of her original bonding ceremony a year earlier. Children ran between gathered warriors, laughter and music filling the training grounds long into the evening, while representatives from various territories mingled freely, discussing trade agreements and future cooperation, with none of the careful political tension that had once defined similar gatherings back in Ashmore. Later that evening, as the celebration continued around them, Naomi found herself standing quietly, with Damien near the edge of the gathering, watching the warmth and connection surrounding them, with a sense of gratitude that still occasionally overwhelmed her, even after an entire year of building this life together. 1 year ago, she said softly, I stood at the edge of Ashmore's grounds, uncertain whether I had the strength to survive what came next. And now? Damien asked, wrapping an arm gently around her shoulders. Now, I understand that surviving was never truly the challenge, Naomi said. The true challenge was learning to believe I deserved genuine partnership, rather than simply accepting whatever careful scraps of consideration I was offered. You deserved considerably more than scraps, Damien said firmly. You deserved exactly what you have built here, earned entirely through your own strength and integrity. Naomi leaned into his steady presence, watching the celebration continue around them, feeling genuinely, completely at peace with everything the past year had brought. She thought of Grace, now serving as one of Veymont's most respected warriors, having found her own place of belonging, alongside Naomi's transformed life. She thought of Ivy, Hazel's wisdom echoing across the distance from Ashmore, reminding her that true worth had always existed independently of Roderick's approval, waiting simply to be discovered somewhere far from those familiar walls. She thought, finally, of the frightened woman who had once stood alone in Ashmore's cold night air, uncertain of everything, except her own unwillingness to continue accepting less than she deserved. That woman had found her way, eventually, to exactly the life she had once been too afraid to imagine possible. As the stars emerged fully across Veymont's clear evening sky, Naomi understood completely that her story had never truly been about escaping betrayal, but about discovering, through genuine partnership and hard-won self-respect, exactly what she had always deserved to have all along. The celebration continued late into the night, warmth and belonging surrounding her completely, and Naomi, Queen of Veymont, finally, genuinely, entirely at peace, allowed herself simply to enjoy the life she had built, one honest choice at a time.